All right, check one, check two. Check's good. We already did the audio check. I don't know why I'm saying that. Here we go. Here we go. Episode 57 of the 40 Ounce Hemlock Podcast. And truth be told, a couple things to say right at the top. Because this is about the 15,000th attempt at this episode. Man, life is hard. And I got 3 loyal listeners out there, and I feel some explanation before we get into the meat of this. Some explanation is maybe needed, maybe not. I don't know. Why? It's been a while, okay? This series that we're in is called Mind the Gap. For those of you just joining us, all 4 of us, I'll be really brief about this. Sorry, I know I've said this before, but if you're just joining us, you haven't heard me say this before. I'm an ex-philosophy professor, ex-philosophy graduate student. I don't do that now anymore. I'm on to different things. But I do this podcast about philosophy and theology and culture and politics and all that ish. And, the heater kicks on as soon as I start. 1 second. All right, I turned it off. It's going for a second. You'll hear it kick off in a second. Okay. All right, I do this podcast, and I really encourage you. You don't have to go back to episode 1, but if you're joining us now, at least go back to the first episode of this series, which would be episode 51. The series is called Mind the Gap. And what this series is about, in 25 words or less, I think, is the way that the mind poses an insoluble problem for those amongst us in the modern world that want to view mankind and the world he lives in, who want to view all that materialistically. Sometimes they're called atheists, sometimes they're called materialists. In philosophy, they're called naturalists. I'm going to be kind of using these words all interchangeably. Where there's nuance necessary, I'll explain, but oftentimes the nuance isn't necessary, and the nuance is annoying, and oftentimes the nuance is just going to make me sound like the annoying people I'm going to be making fun of tonight. Like this guy. Hang on, wait. Like this guy. Okay, so my field was philosophy of mind, philosophy of psychology, philosophy of science, philosophy of religion. Okay, that was kind of like what I concentrated in. And I, over the course of my undergraduate and graduate education, became increasingly convinced that you are being duped. Okay? You are being duped into believing what I have called in previous episodes of this series, believing this thing called the story. Okay? I'm not going to rehearse the story here, right? I'm not going to rehearse it. I'm not going to rehearse it because I do that. Sometimes I just go back and do all previous episodes at the beginning of the current episode. I'm not going to do that. Go back and listen. Start 51. Go through now. Okay. This thing called the story. And the story is false. It is hopelessly flawed. It is fatally flawed. It is false. Okay. But the story that everyone, that's why this podcast is subtitled The Antidote to Academic Poison. Everyone who has gone through a modern, Western, 4-year liberal arts education has been given, has been fed, has imbibed the story, okay? And the reason I'm arguing in this series and others, the reason that you've been fed this story is because ultimately the people in charge of education and government and so on and so forth, I'm kind of sounding like a conspiracy theorist. They want you to believe this because once you believe this, you naturally, in your predispositions and inclinations and values and so on and so forth, you naturally become amenable psychologically, ethically, morally, socially. You become amenable to socialism. Okay? So this series is called Mind the Gap because these people are lying to you about the story. Okay? They're lying to you about their understanding and what they say we know about man and his origins and his place in the world and what the world in general is. Okay? And you can demonstrate this. I've been at pains to demonstrate it in past episodes. I'll be doing so more tonight. You can show this, but you've got to back up a few steps and sort of point out where they're using the story and to what effect they're using it. Okay? I think this episode is going to be called The Religion of MSNBC. Okay? Because a key goal of the story and a key goal of modern Western intellectual liberal arts education in our time, in our culture, is to get you to believe that the left, I hate to call them just the Democrats, the left, the political left, that they are the ones who are uniquely aligned with science. And you, if you're not a leftist, while you may be appreciative or accepting of science, if you're not one of them, you, according to them, no doubt have other beliefs in your repertoire, in your inventory, in your catalog of beliefs, in your worldview, the outlook through which you look at the whole world. You have other beliefs that are not motivated by, that are not grounded in science. And they use this coloring of your position as a way of diminishing you and excluding you. Okay? And the flip side of that is that they cast their position as being purely scientific. Now, why would they want to do that? Okay, they want to do that because what is the sort of like stereotypical conception of science? It's that it's neutral, is that it's totally open to the facts as presented to us. It's free of bias. Okay. So they want to paint you as someone who is not free of bias, and they want to paint themselves as those who are utterly free of bias and thus completely aligned with science. And they do this to rule you out of the conversation, to rule you out of the dialogue, to discredit you, to exclude you from the jump, from the start. Okay? So I'm calling this particular episode, this installment of the series that I'm calling Mind the Gap, I'm calling this one The Religion of MSNBC. And in this installment, we're going to look at this clip that I've been gesturing at and anticipating all throughout this series. We're finally going to look at this clip. Not the whole clip, just like 10 minutes from it. Because what you're going to find, and what I've gestured at in previous installments leading up to this, is that their position that they start from, this is a really key idea. When I say that they start from this position, that's a really key idea. Because the position you start from in any endeavor, in any intellectual inquiry, is not something that you argue for. It's not something that you give arguments for. It's the position you start from. You're not arguing to it. You're arguing from it. Okay? So these people, the left, the political media on the left, and the intellectuals, or I've often say the pseudo-intellectuals that they trot out on their evening shows and their Sunday shows, all these people are motivated by a position that's called naturalism, okay? But they don't ever admit this. They hide this. The smarter ones know that they're doing this. The less intelligent ones don't know. You're going to see a whole range of those folks on this panel in this discussion. They're motivated by this position called naturalism, okay? And naturalism, okay, Lord help me. I'm not going to rehash all this here. I've explained it in past episodes. Go back. Stop right now. If you're listening, start from 51 and come up to this point, okay? Naturalism is not a scientific position. They're doing a sort of sleight of hand with you. They're doing a sort of cup and balls routine with you, okay? They're pretending like what they believe is utterly motivated by science, when in fact it's utterly motivated by naturalism. Why is that important? It's because naturalism is not a position that is learned from science. It is a religious / philosophical / metaphysical position. It's a position you start from to investigate the facts and decide what can be a fact and what can't be a fact, and what kind of facts are admissible, and what kind of evidence is admissible, and what kind of conclusions can be reached. It's like a lens through which you see everything else. Now, they see everything through this lens, but they don't acknowledge the lens. They just act like they're looking at everything neutrally, okay? And they call their position scientific, and they call you pseudoscientific, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I know you're familiar with this. If you're watching this podcast, or you're listening to this podcast, whatever, you should be watching this one. This is on YouTube now. We're on YouTube now. Did a lot of past episodes on the audio, but this is there's going to be a huge visual component to this, so watch it on YouTube, okay? If you're on a podcast platform right now, stop, go to YouTube, listen to this episode on YouTube. Sorry, watch this episode on YouTube. So they pretend like they're beginning from a neutral position, like the neutral, empirical, scientific position. And they use this false starting point, this hidden lens, to color everything they see and say and do, and color everything they accuse you or attribute to you of seeing and saying and doing. Okay? So this episode is called The Religion of MSNBC because I want to take you through a brief panel discussion on a show from MSNBC, a panel discussion populated by 4 or 5 people. And what's really interesting about this panel discussion, and this is old in a sense, I've been holding on to this in my back pocket for years, okay? And there's a million clips I could use to do this same thing, but I just want to do it with this one, okay? Because there's so much that is very entertaining about this. And it's YouTube, and you want to be entertained, you'll be entertained. Trust me. Okay, there's so much that is interesting visually, from a body language standpoint, from a dialogue there's so much that is interesting about this. You're going to see. But the key thing that we're going to focus on is both the agreement among these panelists and the disagreement. Okay, what they agree on is something that none of them will say outright. Okay, it's below the surface. They're all naturalists. And again, naturalism is a religious/philosophical position. But none of them admit that. They all just pretend to be neutral observers, neutral intellectual inquirers, okay? And this position, this hidden position of naturalism allows them to sort of reach the conclusions that they reach and castigate you and make fun of you and mock you and scoff at your beliefs in the way that they do, okay? This discussion is led and sort of like refereed by Christopher Hayes. And how do I say this? I hate to love him or love to hate him or maybe both. It's very unchristian of me. In a way, it's very Christian of me. In a way, it's very unchristian of me. This guy is like the archetypical, to use Jordan Peterson's kind of language, he's like the archetypical annoying, overly nuanced pseudo-intellectual graduate student. And I'm sorry, I have a huge amount of distaste and dislike for this guy. I'm going to try to like curb that a little bit, okay? Because I really just want you to hear the discussion amongst these folks. But if you find yourself annoyed with this guy and people like him, join the club. And if so, you'll appreciate the analysis that's coming in this episode. Okay, so we're gonna watch this clip, and I think I said a moment ago I should just explain to my 3 listeners. Man, we've been at this for a while. Let me go back here. Episode 51, the 31 flavors of political polarization. Fall of 2021. Part 2 of this series, fall of 2021. Part 3 of this series, fall of 2021. Part 4 of the series, fall of 2021. And then... Sorry. Listen, I'm just a man, and I'm a flawed man. There's things going on in my life that have prevented me from getting to this in the way that I wanted to. And yet, man, when there's something that animates your mind and heart, when there's something driving you, you got to do it. You got to do it. So I'm coming back to this for my 3 loyal listeners. I love you. Maybe it's more than 3. It's like 5. I love you. And you'll notice Part 5 was in fall of 2022. Part 6 was in fall of 2023. And here we are in 2024. Sorry. All right. But here we are. And we're going to keep pushing forward because I just cannot let this go. We live in very precarious times. And we are we are in the midst of social breakdown. And many have argued that we're headed towards civil war. And I don't want to get into all that here. We might do a little installment at the end of this series about what that means and the merits of those who say that we're headed that way, whatever. But the civil war on a physical level, like guns and battle and fighting and all that has all, we've been building towards that in an intellectual way, in a cultural way for a long time. And that's what we're talking about here. Okay. And this dynamic between the naturalists and the rest of us is a key driver. It is like the main motivating, it's like the motor on the engine that's driving us towards the cliff. Okay. And that's why I want to talk about it. All right. You, for a long time, as a conservative, as a Christian, as a Jew, as a Muslim, as a believer in God, as a believer in some sense of like the traditional values and that way of looking at the world, you have been marginalized, okay? And you're being marginalized by these people. And the thing that I've called the story in past installments of this series is the way that they're doing that. It's the con. It's the game. It's the ruse. You've got to understand this. And once this is the great thing. Once you understand it, and once you see them doing it and see the game that's being played against you, it is so freeing. Because then you can just laugh at these people the way they ought to be laughed at. Okay? Because they are, in fact, false and phony. They are pseudo intellectuals. They are not what they pretend to be. But they run academia. They run the intellectual domains, okay? And they have propped up this whole Potemkin village. They've set up this whole game to make you feel like an outsider. Okay? Well, what'd I do there? Okay. So we're gonna get into it and we're gonna talk about that. And I want to walk you through this discussion among them. It's so interesting on so many levels. Okay? And that's probably enough of an intro. But I'm going to try to just sort of highlight examples of and illustrations of the points I've been making in past episodes of this series. Again, go back to 51. Stop. Pause. Go back to 51 and then come up to this point. Okay? Because in the first installment of the series, it was just this brief excursion about political polarization. And then in 52 through 56, I got into the whole thing about naturalism and psychologizing and this game that they're playing against you that has culminated in this new intellectual field. It's bullshit. Called neuropolitics. Okay? If you don't know, do I need to say it again? If you don't know what neuropolitics is, go back. Just go back. Stop. Just go back to 51 and start. But in 51, I talked about political polarization and the way they fail to understand what political polarization actually is. And actually, that makes me want to just stop here and just take a quick excursion because I came across this clip. Man, I don't know. Like a lot of us, I find a lot of respite in stand-up comedy, and I've recently gotten onto this dude, Shane Gillis, and I gotta just play this real fast because I saw this and it reminded me of the first installment of this series. Let me just break away real fast because this is great and it's a little bit of levity at the beginning.
Yeah, I just get online, read opinions from people. The news, like other news, is kind of like, this is the most divided this country has ever been. It's like with the red states and the blue states. It's like, why? Because we tweet at each other? You know we had a war, right? You know this country had a civil war? That was pretty divided. Like at least nowadays we're communicating with each other. Back then, those guys they got the news like once a month. Some guy would come by on a horse and they were like, who's talking shit? And the guy was like, the South is talking shit. They were like, fuck that, I don't like that. Give me my gun, I'm gonna go down there. I'm gonna walk down there for a month straight. Shoot the first fucking guy I see down there. That's it.
Okay, all right, sorry, not sorry. I love Shane Gillis. Okay, he's fantastic. Okay, so let's get started. We're gonna look at this clip, and we're gonna see so much of what we talked about in previous installments of this series illustrated. And again, the great thing about this clip, if you've been following this podcast from episode way back when I started, from episode 1, you know that one of my favorite things to do is show you that despite the red states and the blue states, and despite the conservatives and the liberals, and despite the right and the left, and despite the atheists and the theists, and despite the naturalists and the non-naturals, however you want to cash out this like crack that's forming through our society, what's so interesting, if you've been in this world, and I existed in this academic world for a long time, and that's kind of why that is why I do this podcast, is I want to show you what's going on in the ivory tower. I want to give you a peek behind the curtain. Okay, what I've been at pains to do from episode 1 of this podcast, not 51, 1, is show you that even on the blue side, even on the liberal side, even on the leftist side, even on the naturalist, atheist side, like those guys, not ours, not this side, that side, even amongst them, there are these occasional rays of light that poke through. There are these intellectuals that pop up among them, and they're more honest than the other ones. And they speak up, or they write a journal article, or they appear on a show, and they say something, or they do some research and present. Right? And what they have to say exposes what's going on amongst the rest of them, and the rest of them don't like that. Okay, I do this. That's kind of like the common theme through all the past episodes and series of this podcast. Okay, and you're gonna see it again tonight. Okay. That's one of the really interesting things about this panel discussion, is because it's a panel discussion. Remember, I talked about agreement and disagreement. It's a panel discussion among people who are all naturalistic in their outlook. They're all essentially, from my point of view, leftist. But there's one guy who is like one of these intellectuals that I've highlighted in past episodes, who's had something to say, who's like, we're not really being honest with our opponents. And when one of them speaks up and starts doing that, it becomes very problematic for the rest of them. So what's the reason I've wanted to play this clip, the reason I've wanted to analyze this clip for so long, is because the dynamic among these people on this panel with this one guy who's doing that is so entertaining. Okay? And I hope that I can convey that. So let's get to it. Let's take a look at this clip from the annoying, eternal, nuanced, hyper-nuanced, pointlessly nuanced graduate student Christopher Hayes. God, I'm being so mean. Look, I'm annoying. I get it. Like, I can't. What am I gonna say about this guy? It's his positions that bother me. You can't appeal to everyone. I'm sure there's people that when I communicate, they're like, God, that dude's annoying. I get it. This guy to me is like, he's so frustrating. But like I said, I'm going to try to keep that criticism at bay where possible. I'm only a man. I'm just a man. Okay. But he hosts this show on MSNBC. I think back in the day, the show was called Up, and now it's called All In or something like that. I forget which one which incarnation of his show this clip is from. It doesn't matter. But it's him and these several panelists, and they are talking about what I've talked about in previous installments of this series, this field. Essentially, the discussion is about neuropolitics. The series that we're in now is called Mind, the Gap. Mind is the gap. Mind, the human mind, okay, is what the leftists, the materialists, the atheists, the naturalists, the evolutionists, it's the thing they can't explain. And if you think they can't explain it, then you need to go back to episode 51 and start. They can't. It cannot be done. After Darwin wrote, they all breathed a big sigh of relief. Not because Darwin showed that the mind could be a material thing that evolved and it was essentially just the brain, but just because they had this theory now that would allow them to say, oh, but it must be that. But then after Darwin, there's this like 100-ish year period where the philosophers of psychology, the philosophers of mind, the cognitive theorists, like all the evolutionary psychologists, like all these guys tried to give explanations, tried to give theories of how the mind could actually be the brain, and they all fail. They all fail. And I've chronicled how they fail in prior installments of this series. Go back. I'm done saying go back. Wait, I'm going to say it one more time. Go back. Okay? It's the 100-year fail. But all these people, all the panelists on this panel, were raised on the mother's milk of this intellectual environment that we have grown up in modern Western education, right? And they all believe it, right? They're just like, oh yeah, Darwin, right? And the mind is the brain, right? And we're all material beings in a material world, and everything's material, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't work. It does not work. Mind is the gap. You cannot explain the human mind in terms of the activity of physical particles. It cannot work. And I've demonstrated that. Okay? Go back. Okay, so, but they keep up this charade. Why do they keep up this charade? Well, again, because they have a political, social motive in doing so. Because if they can convince you that you're a material being in a material world, then you will ipso facto, just naturally, in the course of things, just naturally become more amenable to socialism and communism and Marxism. Because a material being, human person, in a material world is just a fundamental assumption from which Marxism starts. From which socialism starts. You don't get that economic social theory until you first assume that a human person and human society is just composed of material beings all vying for stuff and competing, and their needs are utterly material, and their wants are utterly material, and their desires are utterly material, and they are utterly material. Okay, so again, the smart ones among them know this, and they're playing the game consciously. The stupid ones, and there's some stupid ones on this panel, are just going along with what they were taught because they're not independent thinkers. They're not intellectual. They're not analysts, right? They're just regurgitating what they were taught in school. They are regurgitating and operating in light of the story. What's the story? Go back to episode 51 and come up to this point. I'm done. I'm not done. We're just getting started, okay? So this is a really fascinating discussion among these people, and it's going to illustrate so much of what we talked about, and let's get started with it after I have a sip of beer. All right, sorry I had to throw on a hat. It's cold in here. I turned off the heater, now I'm freezing. Got to keep the brain warm. Got to keep the brain warm. Not the mind, the brain. They're different. All right? They're different things. The mind and the brain are different things. Look, maybe I should just say this real quick at the top. I know I said I wasn't going to rehash prior episodes. But if you've ever been in an argument with someone about something you care about, something you're passionate about, perhaps it's something social, perhaps it's something political, perhaps it's something religious, perhaps it's something moral, ethical, anything like that. You've maybe encountered a situation where you're arguing with someone and you're giving your reasons for the conclusion that you think is true, and they're giving reasons for why the conclusion that you think is true is false, and you're going back and forth, and you're giving premises and they're giving premises, and you're saying things and they're trying to refute them and confute them. The back and forth, it's just how it happens, right? And you've maybe been in a situation where at some point in the conversation, in the dialectic, as they call it, right? In the dispute, in the argument, at some point, they say something like this. You give some reason for what you think, or some set of reasons, and they say something like this. They say, no, that's not why you think that. You only think that because blank. And what they put in the blank is something that, if we would step back and analyze it, is something that has nothing logically or rationally to do with your conclusion. Like, just stereotypical cartoonish examples here. You only believe that because you're a man. You only believe that because you're a woman. You only believe that because you're white. You only believe that because you're black. You only believe that because you're a Christian. You only believe that because you're a Westerner. You only believe that because you're an American. You only believe that because you're not American. Right? There's some in philosophy when you study these things called fallacies. Right? A fallacy is like a mistake in reasoning. Right? And there's this fallacy called the genetic fallacy. Okay, and the genetic fallacy is where you give a reason for something being true, but the reason has no logical bearing, has no logical connection with the thing being true. You're giving like a more of a cause for the belief than a reason for the belief. There's a very, very big difference between a cause and a reason. Okay, like I might get hit in the head in some certain way, right? And because of the way I was hit in the head, my brain gets rattled around and I say 4 + 4 = 8. Okay. But my getting hit in the head, it's possible, right? It's possible. In philosophy, we just talk about pure possibility, right? It's possible. That could happen, right? I could get jarred in the brain and such. I could get hit in a fight or something, and it could cause me to utter some claim, right? I could assert something based on the pure neurophysical processes, right? Now, that jarring of the head or that getting hit in the head or whatever it is that has no logical bearing or no rational bearing on 4 + 4 being 8. It's not a reason to believe that 4 + 4 = 8. It's a cause of my believing that 4 + 4 = 8. Or in this case, it's a cause of my just asserting that 4 + 4 = 8. Even if 4 + 4 does equal 8, spoiler alert, it does, right? Me getting hit in the head, this jarring of brain, whatever happens in my brain that causes this neurophysiological process that causes me to utter these words, right? It triggers my vocal cords, it triggers my neurons, right? It's a cause of my asserting that truth. But it's not a logical or rational reason for believing that 4 + 4 = 8. If you want a logical or rational reason for believing that 4 + 4 = 8, you have to analyze the basic concepts of mathematics and addition and quantity, and right? You see what I'm saying? Right? So there's a difference between a cause of a belief and a reason for a belief. And in philosophy, the genetic fallacy is just a confusion of causes and reasons. So when someone says to you, no, you don't believe that because of the reasons you're giving, the reasons you're saying you believe it, you only believe it because they put a cause in that blank. They put a cause of your belief. It's only because, see the word because? It's only because you're white, or because you're black, or because you're a Christian, or because you're a non-Christian, or because you're a man, or because you're a woman, or because you were born in America, or because you're, right? That's why it frustrates you when you're in an argument about something you really believe. That's why it frustrates you when they do that. Because here you are in this argumentative dialectical situation, right? And you're like really doing the work of trying to give reasons for what you believe and shore up your belief and give a good argument. And they're like, no, that's not why you believe that. You only believe that because blank. And they put some random thing in there that has nothing to do rationally, logically, with your belief. It's a cause of your belief. You only believe that because you're a capitalist, right? See? That has no logical, rational bearing on the truth of your belief, in the same way that getting bumped on the head has no rational provides no rational grounding for the assertion of the belief 4 + 4 = 8, right? You can manipulate somebody's brain and cause them to utter things that might be true, but the manipulation of the brain provides no logical grounding for the truth of the claim. The truth is in the meaning of the statements that undergird the claim, the reasons, the logical reason, right? So there's this difference between a reason for believing something and a cause of believing something. Okay? You with me so far? Okay, if you understand that, then you can understand why neuropolitics, which is what is at play in this clip that we're about to watch, is such a poison to our modern society and political discussion and social and cultural situation. Because what neuropolitics is, it is the ultimate confusion of reasons and causes. These people in this discussion, on this panel, and everyone you've probably dealt with in academia and the intellectual world and on the media, which takes its cue from the intellectual and academic world, they're all naturalists. And as naturalists, they're all materialists. They believe that your mind is just your brain. See? Do you not see yet? Follow. And because, according to them, your mind is just your brain, well, if we just follow the logic, you really only believe you only believe the things you believe because of your brain activity, not the reasons that you think you believe it. Not the semantic and cogent logical relations among the prior beliefs that cause you to form the new belief. Not the logical inferences, not the logic, not the rationality. You just believe it because of your brain activity. See, if naturalism is true, and I've explained in the previous 2 episodes why it cannot possibly be true. It can't work. Your mind is not your brain. Okay? But if it were, that's why they keep naturalism suppressed in the back pocket. That's why they don't show it. They just argue from it. They don't prove it. They just pretend like it's the natural position. No pun intended. It's just the beginning point, and they treat you like we all should begin from this point. Because if that's true, then your mind is just your brain. If naturalism, materialism is true, then your mind, atheism, whatever, I said I'm going to use these terms interchangeably. If that's true, then your mind is just your brain. Now really think about this. If your mind is just your brain, then any belief you have is just the result of your brain activity. Now, what is your brain activity a result of? Your brain activity is just a result of as they say in philosophy, the material history of your brain. You in particular as the person, and the evolutionary history of your brain behind you. Any belief you might have is just a fizzling up, it's just a bubbling up of the neurochemical processes in your brain, which are governed by prior past physical neurochemical processes, right? In other words, your reasons don't matter. So, in the argument with your friend about the thing you're really passionate about, that's why you're so annoyed when someone says to you, no, that's not why you believe what you believe. You only believe that because after that word because, they insert something that is not a rational, logical reason for believing something. They insert something that is a cause for you believing something. So they totally disregard your reasons. They totally disregard your logic. They totally disregard your argument. And they insert something that is, in the very nature of the case, not logically or rationally related to your conclusion. You see? This is what neuropolitics is. Neuropolitics is a new, academically, as they say in academia, a new sexy theory about why people hold the political beliefs that they hold. And neuropolitics begins from the assumption of naturalism and says, well, we need to just stop analyzing people's reasons and what they say and their beliefs and just look at their brains, right? And if we want to understand their beliefs, we just need to understand the evolutionary history of their brains, right? And the upshot of it is if we want to change their beliefs, we need to change their brains. Paging Aldous Huxley, A Brave New World. Do you understand? Pause, stop the podcast, go read A Brave New World. Okay, so this is a discussion, essentially, on this panel about neuropolitics. And you're going to see that as the discussion plays out, okay? Man, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I'm like keyed up and keyed down. I got this Zen nicotine pouch Tucker told me would make me rich. All keyed up from the nicotine and all keyed down from the IPA. We'll get through it. We'll get through it. So let's play the clip, and we're going to comment as needed. And I hope that if you've listened to parts 1 through 6 prior to this, everything will be revealed as we do. Okay? So here's the discussion as it happens amongst Chris Hayes, Christopher Mooney, Jonathan Haidt, Jonathan McWhorter, and this other chick. I forget what her name is. We'll see. All right. All right.
If our political institutions seem more dysfunctional than ever before, that's probably because they're more polarized than ever before. And we're not just talking about our perpetually deadlocked Congress. Even among voters at large, the broad center seems to be rapidly diminishing. One of the most insidious features of the kind of polarization we're seeing in America now is that it makes it difficult, if not impossible, to relate to people at the other end of the spectrum. They seem irrational, detached from reality, outright crazy. There are 2 books out now that try to parse this phenomenon.
Sorry, I paused the wrong one. Let me back up a second.
They ask the question, they seem irrational, detached from reality, outright crazy.
The reason that the left seems irrational and crazy to the right, and the right seems irrational and crazy to the left, is because we do not all begin from the same position. But the left, because they are children of the narrative, they are intellectual children of the story that they were taught in undergraduate and graduate school in the modern Western educational system. They believe that we all start from this position, okay? They just assume, they just presuppose naturalism. Now you, as a normal, traditional person who believes that right and wrong and justice and injustice and all that stuff are real things, you know that the conclusions that they come to, a baby is just a clump of cells, right? Like men dressing up as women should be able to read to little kids in libraries, all that stuff, right? You know that that's insane. But sometimes you can't quite put your finger on how to show that. And the reason that you can't quite find the locus, the point in the argument in which to like find where the actual dispute happens, is because they are keeping that position. They are keeping that starting point tucked away and pretending with you like we all start from the same position. Okay? That is why the other side, whoever you are, seems totally detached from reality. Okay?
There are 2 books out now that try to parse this phenomenon. They ask the question, if through evolution we've all inherited the same moral intuitions, then how do we end up so far apart on so many basic political issues? We have the authors of...
See? If through evolution we all inherit the same moral intuitions, spoiler alert, no we don't. Evolution cannot... I gotta flex a little bit here, I'm sorry. This is my work in graduate school. We don't inherit moral intuitions from evolution. That's impossible according to the principles of evolution. Evolution cannot provide a moral grounding to anything. And if naturalism is true, the position which gives rise to evolution, there can't be any objective moral principles at all. So moral intuitions are meaningless. Okay? But this discussion begins after that point. This is the game that is being played on you. If you can just understand this, you can just write all these people off and laugh at them and protect yourself and your family and your country. Okay? But you have to see this. You have to understand how they have first done the heavy lifting by cheating on the heavy lifting. They have contained their the sum and substance and the heavy lifting of their position in a conclusion that they have just begun from. And they're treating you like, well, yeah, you share this conclusion too. You share this position too. We all begin from the same starting point. Like Christopher Hayes just said, if through evolution we all inherit the same moral intuitions, then how could we end up so divided? Ooh, how could we be so polarized? All right.
Both of those books here with us today. Chris Mooney, who, as I mentioned before, is the author of The Republican Brain. And joining us now at the table is Jonathan Haidt, professor of psychology.
Okay. Now, Christopher, look in the bottom left corner of the screen, The Republican Brain. That's the name of Christopher Mooney's book. Now, I've talked in this series and others about students who have grown up, who have matriculated in the modern Western intellectual system. Okay? Christopher Mooney is a perfect example of that. Christopher Mooney is an undergrad English major. I really want you to appreciate. That's why I'm going slow here. I gotta slow down anyways. Christopher Mooney is an undergrad English major from Princeton, and he has written a book called The Republican Brain, where he is at pains to explain to you, the conservative, the Christian, the traditionalist, the Republican, the right, why your brain is actually the explanation of why you believe what you believe. He's an undergrad English major. Now you might say, Nick, what could an undergraduate English major from an Ivy League institution possibly know in any thoroughgoing depth, in any meaningful sense about the brain and how it explains? It's because he grew up in this system. He was educated in this system where naturalism is just the beginning point of all discussions. Okay? And if naturalism is the beginning point of the discussion, well, then your mind has to be your brain. And if your mind is your brain, then anything you believe is just a result of the current and prior states of your brain. So, incidentally, I talked in a previous installment about the link between the scientism and naturalism of these folks and the Marxism of folks like Black Lives Matter and Antifa and groups like that. They're one and the same. I think in just a couple episodes back, the PTA, the FBI, and remember that episode? They will fuse, and they are fusing because they share the same foundational assumption. That is why Antifa and Black Lives Matter and all these Marxist front groups, that's why they cancel you. Think about what canceling someone is. It's saying, like what happens when a conservative speaker goes to speak at an institution. They say, no, we don't even need to hear you. We're just going to throw stuff at you and shout you down. We don't need to hear. What don't we need to hear? We don't need to hear your reasons. We don't need to hear your logic. Think very deeply with me about why they would think that. It's because they're naturalists. You see? And naturalists don't believe, they cannot believe that reason and logic have anything to do with how a belief is ultimately formed. Why? Because if naturalistic materialism is true, then a belief is ultimately formed because of brain activity, not because of logical sequences of thought. That's why they shout you down. That's what cancellation really is. Okay? So Christopher Mooney is just the perfect example in the way that Christopher Hayes is just the perfect example of the hopelessly nuanced pseudo-intellectual graduate student who talks too fast and says things like problematic. I say problematic sometimes, but I say it in the right sense. Okay? And Christopher Mooney is the perfect example, as you'll see in a minute. That's not Christopher Mooney on the screen right now. Christopher Mooney is just the perfect example of the student who has grown up in this system, who is matriculated in this system, who is born out of this system of education and just thinks, well, these things are obviously true. So here's my conclusions. They're all naturalists. So he's written a book, it's such a hack book, okay, called The Republican Brain. And The Republican Brain, his book, is a 180, 200-page elaboration of what I just told you. It's just like when your friend in an argument says, no, you don't believe that because of the reasons you're giving. You only believe that because blank. And in the place of the blank, they insert some completely non-logical, non-rational cause of your belief. See? This is called, like I said, in philosophy, it's called the genetic fallacy. It's also called psychologizing. It's when you tell somebody that they don't believe something because of why they're saying they believe it for other reasons. But it's not really other reasons, it's other causes. and causes are not logically related to the truth of a belief. I could get hit in the head and I could utter something that were true, 2 + 2 = 4, but the brain activity resulting from my getting hit in the head has no logical bearing on the truth of 2 + 2 = 4. To argue to the truth that 2 + 2 = 4, see, this, and hey, spoiler alert, this is why I just said paging Aldous Huxley earlier. Now we're paging George Orwell. 2 + 2 = 5, right? 2 + 2 = 5. If you read 1984, right? See? They're saying that your beliefs arise from non-rational, non-logical causes. That's what neuropolitics is. And that is now how they are attempting to deal with you. So you are wasting your time in arguing politically with them. And interestingly, Christopher Hayes begins this segment by saying, are we just wasting our time by arguing with them? And in a sense, he's right. He is wasting his time in arguing with us. Because we're not naturalists. You're not a naturalist. If you believe that there's anything really good or really right or really true or really just or really virtuous or really wrong or really unjust, if you believe any of those things, and all people really, really do, right? They just don't see the implications of those beliefs. Then you're not a naturalist. But they want naturalism to be true so bad. They want it to be true. Okay?
Psychology at the University of Virginia and author of The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided. Thanks for joining us this morning. So so far 2 panelists have been introduced. Christopher Mooney, who I already said, and Jonathan Haidt, this gentleman right here. Now, Jonathan Haidt has also written a book called The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided. And Jonathan Haidt in this discussion is going to be an example of what I have said in past series of this podcast, past installments of other series, and this one. He's an example of this interesting sort of intellectual who is kind of breaking with the pack. He's still a naturalist, don't get me wrong. You can't lean on him entirely. In the same way that Jordan Peterson says really valuable things, but you can't lean on him entirely because, look, I love Jordan Peterson. I had a listener, one of my 3 listeners, who was like, my 2 favorite people to listen to are you and Jordan Peterson. What the fuck, right? So you can imagine why I'm still doing this series, even though it's taken me 2 years to do this series, right? I'm like, I gotta finish. If somebody thinks that shit, I gotta finish, right? Okay, Jonathan Haidt has some nuance to bring to this discussion, and in bringing some actual intellectual clarity to this discussion, he's breaking with, in a sense, the naturalists. And what's so interesting about this panel discussion is the way they all respond to that. This is, in some ways, the most important single issue.
The most. This is the most. I gotta get a beer. Hang on a second. Sorry, 1 second. All right, here we go. I'll back it up 2 seconds.
In some ways, the most important single issue.
The most.
To figure out and discuss, because fully agree. I have personally evolved in my thinking about polarization, in that I used to be very pro-polarization. I used to think that people's concerns about polarization were this bougie establishment elite concern, and us, the vanguard of righteousness, needed to squash our foes. And I've now realized that to get change on the scale we need, and particularly my sort of preoccupations on climate change, you just can't get it under the current conditions of polarization.
Christopher Hayes is obsessed with climate change. Now, Christopher Hayes, if I were to sit Christopher Hayes down and say, hey, bro, let me show you a list right now of 30,000 material scientists, graduate degreed scientists who have signed a document saying climate change is garbage, he would say, what would he say? He would say, oh, those aren't scientists. Why aren't they scientists? They aren't scientists because they disagree with my conclusion. Okay, so Christopher Hayes is what we have called in the past series called Unmasking Antifa. He is an ideologue, okay? But he cannot, in that series Unmasking Antifa, I talked about ideologues being like someone with glasses with a tint on them, looking through those glasses but not realizing they were seeing everything through the glasses they were wearing, and they were attributing the tint to the things that they were looking at themselves. And ironically, coincidentally, he is wearing tinted glasses here. All right. He's an ideologue. Okay. He's obsessed with climate change. We can get into, I have gotten into elsewhere, we can get into what the belief in climate change ultimately is. I mean, from a religious perspective, the belief in climate change is just the sort of like naturalist attempt to still have some sort of righteous, virtuous religiosity. It's what the Apostle Paul in the book of Romans called the sort of worship of the creation rather than the creator. That's where it stems from. I'm not going to do all that here. But Christopher Hayes is fully in the grip of this thing, and he will not be swayed by any counter evidence because he's not open to evidence. Why is he not open to evidence? Why would he immediately discount a signed list of 30,000 scientists who are like, this is bullshit? Why would he immediately discount them all and say that they're not scientists? Because he's not functioning scientifically. He's functioning ideologically. Naturalism is an ideology. It is an outlook. It is a religious, philosophical, metaphysical outlook. Okay? So he's referencing climate change just as a for instance of why he gets so frustrated with those on the other side. But he doesn't see that the reason he gets so frustrated with those on the other side is because he sees all the evidence for climate change through this ideological lens, much like the tinted lenses that he's wearing on his eyes right now. And he cannot countenance any counter evidence. Remember a little bit ago, looks like 56 minutes ago, when I said that a philosophical religious outlook governs for a person what they can count, what they can even count as evidence. It disallows them from seeing certain kinds of evidence because they have this assumption in place. They have this tint on their glasses that says this can be evidence and that can't be evidence. Okay. So to him, a bunch of scientists are like, this doesn't make any sense. Climate change is bullshit, right? That can't even be evidence for him because of his outlook, because of his philosophy, because of his religious way of looking at the world. Even though he thinks he's not religious, he thinks he's scientific, or pretends to be scientific. All right.
Just cannot get it. So the question is, you have to solve that problem first before you solve the bigger problem. Let me start with you, Chris.
Yeah.
The book is called The Republican Brain, and it's a really good read.
And it's terrible. Forgive me, I read it. It's terrible. And I've explained why. Because it is one long exercise in neuropolitics. And neuropolitics, as I've explained ad nauseum here, sorry we're going so slow, it's just a 10-minute clip that we're going to look at here, 10 minutes of a 20-minute clip. Neuropolitics just is one big, blown up, inflated, hyper-nuanced, hyper-intellectualized instance of the thing that your friend is doing to you when they say, you don't believe that because of your reasons, you only believe that because blank. And they insert non-logical, non-rational causes for your belief, and they say, therefore, I don't have to deal with your reasons. I don't have to deal with your reasons. And in a moment, does Christopher Hayes actually? Oh yeah, he says, in a moment, you're going to hear Christopher Hayes say, I won't even argue anymore with people who don't believe in climate change. You see? I don't have to deal with your reasons. I won't even interact with you. He cancels them. Do you see how all this fits together? Please tell me, because I don't want to keep stopping.
What is the nature of the Republican brain that makes it distinct, or the conservative brain that makes it distinct from?
Yeah, Christopher Mooney, you undergraduate English major from Princeton. Tell us about the nature of the Republican brain, bro.
The liberal brain.
Well, I think it's rooted in personality. Personality is politics, and there's a ton of research showing that the average liberal is much more open to new experiences, new information, trying out new things, and has somewhat of a different cognitive style than the average conservative. And that means tolerating ambiguity, uncertainty, change more, and it makes them psychologically aligned with the scientific community. It's sort of a natural relationship.
Okay, this is super important. What Christopher Mooney is doing here is when I use the term conflating, you get what that means? It's kind of like confusing. It's like treating one thing as another thing, but not really acknowledging that you're treating two different things the same. He's conflating the openness and open-mindedness and neutrality that is essential to the scientific outlook. All right? right? As a scientist, you have to believe that you come to some conclusion, but something that you come across in the future could falsify it. You could come across some evidence that showed that the thing you thought was true is not actually true. That's just what science does, right? He's saying that the liberal is much more aligned with science because they have this open-mindedness, okay? But the real reason for the liberals' open-mindedness about morality and ethics and things that should happen in society and human rights, and the real reason that they want to let men dressed up as women into Target bathrooms and read to small children at libraries, the real reason is because, according to naturalism, ethical principles and moral maxims, morality's not real. I should keep it down. I'm going to cause distortion on this mic. Tucker Carlson, I don't think this is what Tucker Carlson's book is about, but Tucker Carlson has this book that's called The Long Slide. It's about journalism. But think about this. Liberals are engaged in this just long slide of letting one thing become normal and another thing become normal and another thing become normal. And they can never like bring down a barrier. They can never take a principled stand against anything. Why? I hope now that you're beginning to see, if you've been following the series, why they can't. Because if naturalism is true, then the material world is all there is. And if the material world is all there is, then morality cannot be a real thing that exists in the world independent of us. The philosophers who study and talk about this talk about mind dependence versus mind independence. See, gravity is not dependent on our mind. An object is going to fall from the sky at 9.8 meters per second squared, whether you think it should or want it to or like that it does or not. That's mind independence. These people, because they're naturalists, because they begin from naturalism, because they look at the world through a naturalistic lens, like Christopher Hayes is looking at the world through his tinted glasses lens, right? They assume that naturalism is true. And if naturalism is true, then materialism is true. And if materialism is true, then there cannot be a real moral reality to the world. Rather, morality is just kind of something that we have come up with and agreed on and foist onto the world. And because it's that, well, we can just change it. And because it's a changeable thing, utterly in flux, and it's not a real part of the fabric of the universe, well, then anyone who pretends like it is a fabric of the universe, anyone who pretends like, nah, you can't kill babies, and anyone who pretends like, nah, man can't be a woman, and anyone who pretends like, nah, man can't marry a man, and anyone who pretends like, see, anyone who tries to bring down a principled moral barrier and pretend like morality is real and human rights are real, and they have to be discarded. They don't understand. This is all just, we came up with it. Okay? So, the liberals, the leftists, whatever you want to call them, the blue states, all these terms that we intermix and interchange, right? They don't have a view of the world that allows them to see morality as a real thing. And it's the fact that they cannot see morality as a real thing that makes them keep having to bow down and acquiesce and say okay to every insane thing that people say they have a right to do. I gotta tone it down because it's going to get distorted. I'm sorry if there's mic distortion. I get really excited. Okay? For them, morality is mind dependent. It's something we've come up with. And if it's something we've come up with, see, 4 plus 4 equals 8 is not something we came up with. 4 plus 4 would still equal 8 if there were no humans ever. Suppose there was only 8 planets in the solar system. Well, 4 of those planets plus 4 of those planets would be 8 planets. Even if there were no people that ever evolved, people didn't evolve, but even suppose they evolved, right? 4 plus 4 would still equal 8. It's just true, right? But these people think that morality is something that we've come up with. And therefore, the rules and the principles and the maxims that morality articulates are totally changeable. They're dependent on our whims and our preferences and our desires, and they're mind dependent. And that's why when a bunch of people are saying, let us kill our babies, and when a bunch of people say, let us marry people of the same sex, and when they say, let us change our gender, and when all the things that they say, the liberals just have to go, yeah, do that. That's the long slide. That's why you see them as insane and they see you as insane. That totally explains this confusion that Chris Hayes is all puzzled about at the beginning of this clip. That's it. Okay? Mind dependence versus mind independence. As a conservative, as a Christian, as a person who sees the world as it actually is, as a theist, as a non-naturalist, you understand that it is here we go. You ready? You understand that it is as real to say it is wrong to murder as it is to say objects fall from the sky at 9.8 meters per second. Those are truths that go down to the heart of reality. You can't change them. These people think that moral truths are not really truths like that. They're just things that we concocted. They're mind dependent. And of course, if something is just something that we've concocted and is mind dependent, then if you get enough people on the other side pushing and saying, you're oppressing me, let us do this, you have to go, okay. The long slide. All right?
And so then when you see a divide over reality and what's true, and you see the liberals align with the scientists, you should think that's normal. That's kind of the way.
So what Christopher Mooney is doing here is he's saying, oh, you know that openness that a scientist has about, well, we think that gravity works like this, but we might be wrong. There might be some factors we're not taking into account, and scientists has to be open-minded. He's conflating, he's confusing, he's twisting up, he's doing a little sleight of hand. He's twisting up that kind of openness, which is right and true and good. It's like the essence of the scientific endeavor. He's confusing that kind of openness with the kind of openness that results from being a naturalist. And the kind of openness that results from being a naturalist is the kind of openness that cannot take a moral stand against anything, and therefore, if people push hard enough, has to just let it all slide. And let the drag queens read to the toddlers. So he's like saying, oh, well, yeah, the studies show that the liberal mind is more open and the conservative mind is more right? And he's treating the like it's some sort of like demerit, like it's some sort of shortcoming of your view of the world. But your view of the world is not what they're saying. It's not the same as them. You believe that morality is real. You believe that the truth of the statement, it is wrong to murder, is true. It's like, ready? It's like true. It's like true whether anybody was being murdered or is being murdered or will be murdered in the future. Regardless of all that, regardless of the facts, the empirical facts, it's just true. You should not murder. You believe that morality is real, and they do not. And so Christopher Mooney's like saying, well, look, the liberal mind is like more open, like the scientists, and the conservative mind is more, okay? And that's what the research shows in my book. I'm an undergraduate English major, okay?
And that's because there's a kind of personality disposition that is an alchemical mix of nature and nurture, right? Nature, nurture, that produces in people a way of approaching the world that is prior to their politics, but then ends up essentially forming their politics.
Yeah, and their politics probably feeds back into who they are as well, right? So it's it's always in both directions. But partly personality is genetic. We know that. And, yeah.
Okay, sorry, I gotta stop here. Look, these people attribute everything to genetics. Ultimately, they attribute everything to genetics. Ask yourself, just take in everything I've said so far, and ask yourself why they attribute everything to genetics. And you will find, if you've listened so far, that it's not because the evidence actually shows that everything is genetic. It's because material is all there is, and so genetics has to be the explanation. That's why they're naturalists. Again, that's the theme of this show. They're naturalists. It colors everything they see. And so they hide from you the real research, the people who are actually doing work in these fields. Look, let me just break something to you. I mean, if you dig into a subject like homosexuality or something, you will find that the studies that tried to show that homosexuality, this is a subject that touched my life very closely in my family, but I'm keenly attuned to this and keenly aware with the studies that show that homosexuality is genetic are bunk. They're bullshit. Okay? But these people will never accept the studies that show that it's not genetic. Why? Because for them, genes are all there is. Because what else could it be? Right? They have this outlook that colors everything. Okay? And so, as a little spoiler alert, as I like to do here, as a peek behind the curtain, they are so far afield. Look, not only is something as psychological and moral and social as homosexuality not genetic, as the studies have shown, the folks that just study like the development of organisms, there's actually a debate in this field. Evolutionists talk about genotype and phenotype. Okay, genotype is like the arrangement of the DNA and the patterns and the coding in the DNA, and phenotype is like the morphology of the organism itself. Sorry about morphology, the shape and the build, like the organism that results from the genotype. Phenotype, genotype. There's actually a substantial, important debate going on in this field that you'll never hear about, that actually suggests that like phenotype is not even determined by genotype. But these folks are like, oh no, everything as abstract and psychological as homosexuality and even more abstract and psychological as social and political inclinations are totally determined by genotype. They're just lying. This guy might not be lying. He might actually be as stupid as he sometimes looks, as you'll see in a moment. They don't know what they're talking about. Okay? You have to just tune these people out. You have to just... I know your inclination in your gut is to be like, you guys are... What? You're right. You're right. Okay? But they lord over you with this air of intellectualism and, as Christopher Mooney here says, alignment with science. They do that, ironically, to oppress you. Okay? You're the oppressed one. Okay? Free yourself from this bullshit.
Jonathan, one place where the two of you, I think there's some points of contention between your two accounts, but the one place there's Christopher Hayes is doing that. Look at this hand thing. He's so annoying. This guy's like every graduate student in a graduate seminar. Okay, now watch. Oh, it's good that I paused it here. Look at Christopher Hayes has just stopped Christopher Mooney and said, hey guys, I think there's some things that you agree on and some things that you disagree on. And remember what I said at the beginning of this episode, one of the interesting things, like the key interesting thing about this clip that we're looking at is the disagreement and the agreement, because all these people are naturalists. They all agree on the baseline thing. They all have the lenses on, but Jonathan Haidt, sorry, I'm pointing at my monitor up here, you can see it. Jonathan Haidt is this one of these rare intellectuals who's like, maybe we're sort of bullshitting here. We should be more honest. All right. And everyone is going to have a real problem with what he has to say. Now look at Christopher Mooney. This is all going to be about body language. This is like one of those FBI body language YouTube videos. This is so fascinating, right? Watch Christopher Mooney. Watch Jonathan Haidt as Christopher Hayes interacts with both of them. Because what you'll see is Christopher Mooney being like, okay, bro, I know you're my intellectual superior. That's a given. Like, you're like an actually degreed, PhD'd psychologist, and I'm just an undergraduate English major from Princeton. But like, bro, we're on the same team, right? Like, we're on the same team, right? Dropped his in. Thanks, Tucker. All right. Now look at the little obsequious, like sort of acquiescent look on his face, like, hey, what are we gonna do here? Because Christopher Hayes is now drawing attention to a point that we disagree on. So let's not let this point that we disagree on
get blown up to any substantial size or importance that it might disrupt what we're ultimately trying to do to the people who are watching this clip. Oh, God. I wish I could just get paid to do this. All right, here we go. Ready? So all throughout, I'm going to keep pausing it, and every time I pause it, you're going to see one of these looks on Christopher Mooney, that's the guy on the left, on Christopher Mooney's face, because he knows that Jonathan Haidt is about to talk. And Jonathan Haidt has way more of substance to say than Christopher Mooney does. Christopher Mooney is an undergraduate English major from Princeton. Okay? So just watch. Just watch. Here's Christopher Hayes introducing Jonathan Haidt's theory as exemplified in his book, The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided.
Place you share, which I think is a profound insight and is drawn from the social psychological research at this point, is that reason is essentially constructed ex post to come up with reasons to...
God, he's such an annoying graduate student. What he means is that the literature shows that reason, remember we talked about causes versus reasons? The literature, the social psychological literature, suggests that reasons aren't really the reasons we believe what we believe. Reasons are constructed after the fact to sort of shore up what we already believe at a deeper level. But why do we believe those things at a deeper level? What explains the lenses on our eyes through which we see the evidence? Jonathan Haidt has some very interesting things to say about that. And as you look at these two gentlemen, I use the term loosely, watch Christopher Mooney as Jonathan Haidt explains that, okay? Because it's... Oh, God. Please, Lord, let me get through this episode. Ready? Ready? Okay, you're going to see... If you're at all like a student of body language or a student of like countenance or how people present themselves, you're going to notice some very interesting things about Christopher Mooney as this discussion proceeds. So let it proceed here.
To justify things that we already...
So I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. I'm not sorry. I'm going to just keep backing it up and being like, look at this, look at this, look at this. Watch the little
psychological research at this point is that reason is essentially constructed ex post to come up with reasons to justify.
See the over-exemplified head nod by Chris Mooney, like, yes, this much we agree on. Let's just keep it there. Let's just keep it there. And look at these two in the background here. These two have nothing to say yet. It's going to take these two forever to contribute to this conversation because they're intellectual lightweights. These guys have a little bit more of substance to say. They're the main part of the discussion. Just what? Look, even on this part that I paused it, look at Christopher Mooney looking at Jonathan Haidt like, bro, take it easy. Just go lightly. Just work with us. We're all on the same team. We're all naturalists.
Things that we already arrive at viscerally and through intuition. And I want to play this clip of Glenn Beck. He's talking about these leaked emails that the right turned climate gate, which they said completely disproved the consensus on global warming, which of course it did not. And he's explaining why this...
Well, yeah, of course it disproved the consensus on global warming because the leaked emails showed that the global warming, the IPCC's International Panel of Climate Change Scientists were totally doctoring the data to fit their narrative about global warming. But Christopher Hayes cannot accept that because he's got this outlook through which he sees the evidence. Just like he can't accept that there's 30,000 plus scientists who are like, this is bullshit. He can't accept that. He just calls them non-scientists. In the same way that when Darwin first wrote, some of his colleagues, some of his peers in the field were like, this doesn't really work. And everybody said, oh, you're not doing science. It's the same thing, right? They're ideologues. They're not open-minded. They're not neutral. They have glasses on. And if you're not wearing the same color of tint on your glasses, you just say about the other guy, well, he's not really doing, he's not real, blah, blah, he's not, right? In philosophy, this is called the no true Scotsman fallacy. Right? No true Scotsman would say that because so-and-so says that. He's not a true Scotsman. Right? Sorry, that's just a little inside. Okay, let me just back it up. I just love watching these little looks from Christopher Mooney to Jonathan Haidt. Watch.
Turned climate gate, which they said completely disproved the consensus on global warming, which of course it did not. And he's explaining
which of course it did not. I cannot possibly accept that there's anything contrary to my view about climate because those aren't real scientists. Okay? So he's just exemplifying He's just exemplifying the bias here. But I'm not going to get hung up. He's going to play a little clip from Glenn Beck, which is entertaining. I don't carry any special brief for Glenn Beck. He seems like a nice guy. He says a lot of things that I think are true, but he's kind of one of these folks who sort of functions at this level that is sort of like above like the real intellectual issues that have to be unearthed if you're going to get to the bottom of all this shit. Okay, so Glenn Beck, whatever, I don't really follow him. He seems like a cool guy, and he says things that are true. But these guys, here's going to be the little part where we make fun of Glenn Beck, and then we're going to get to what we're ultimately going to get to here.
This evidence is so important, and he basically makes the argument for this kind of ex post reasoning explicitly. Here he is.
If your gut said, wait a minute, this global warming thing, it sounds like a scam. Well, I think you're seeing it now. We told you this was going on without proof because we listened to our gut. You'd never believe me. But once again, here we are with yet another brand new reality.
Now, this is highly ridiculable, but what you are...
Yeah, we all nod and agree. Yes, Glenn Beck's an idiot. Anybody who disagrees with climate change is an idiot because we're all naturalists and we all know that disagreement just because it was flatly proved from email evidence that the IPCC scientists were totally doctoring the evidence about global warming, that doesn't matter because for these people, global warming and any of the other theories that they hold are not about the evidence. It's not about the evidence. It's about the outlook. And the outlook, the lens through which they see everything says this has to be true. So they don't care about the actual particular instances of evidence. You see?
Both are saying is that actually the research and science says we listen to our gut and then we come up with reasons, right, John?
That's right. So what we've seen for a long time now is that the Republicans are better at moral psychology than the Democrats. And
yeah, why is that? Sorry, just to harken back to what I said a few minutes ago. Why is it? Look at the little... Here we have a little instance of the nervous look from Christopher Mooney, right here, to Jonathan Haidt. Because here Jonathan Haidt is saying, yeah, the social psychological research shows that Republicans are better at moral psychology. 40-ounce hemlock listeners, watchers, whatever you are, all my 3 to 5 loyal listeners, why do you think it's the case? Remember that long rant I just went on about the long slide. Why do you think it's the case that Republicans are better at moral psychology? Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's because they have a worldview, a lens, through which they see the world, such that morality is a real thing. And so when they come to a moral conclusion, they view that moral conclusion as a real truth about the world and not just a Christopher Walken crazy make-em-up. But for these folks, the naturalists, any moral conclusion has to be, in the very nature of the case, by way of the lens they view reality, which is naturalism. That conclusion just has to be a crazy make-em-up because all of morality is a crazy make-em-up that we made up, that we just foist onto reality, and it might change. If anybody presses hard enough or protests hard enough or says you're oppressing me, we got to change it. It's a long slide. So of course Republicans are better at moral psychology because they view morality as a reality. And naturalists, it's not just that naturalists don't, it's that they can't. If naturalistic materialism is true, then morality is a fiction. And if it's a fiction, you can never take a principled stance against anything. If it's just something that we came up with, then it's just something that we came up with, and we might change it, and we should if enough people say that they're oppressed.
George Lakoff was saying this, Drew Weston was saying this. The left tends to cling to this idea that if you just, if you construct the message vehicle.
I just love watching Christopher Mooney watch Jonathan Haidt. He's like, how far are you going to go with this, bro? Look at his hands. His little fingertip on fingertip pose here, trying to remain composed, just watching Jonathan Haidt, who's clearly, as you're going to see in a moment, his intellectual superior. It's like, bro, stay with us here. Stay on the team, okay? And as this discussion proceeds, you're going to see increasing tension about how far Jonathan Haidt is going in disrupting the story, in disrupting the narrative that the left, the Democrats, the blue states, whatever you want to call them, the naturalists, how far they go in using their outlook to manipulate you by treating their outlook like it's neutral and you share it.
In the right way and put the ideas and the evidence out there, it will go into people's brains and change their minds. And that's just not the way it works. So, Beck and Colbert and many Republican strategists understand you've got to speak to the gut first.
Nervous laugh.
One of the points I want to make is that while I fully agree with Chris has done a great job surveying the literature. I want to give him the stamp of approval. He is not cherry-picking. He is representing the current state of thinking about politics and personality.
Okay, I gotta stop it. Sorry. I gotta stop it. If you've worked or existed or functioned in the academic world where you are taking in and assimilating and imbibing theories proposed by other people and then offering your criticism of them, which is just what academia does, right? Then you know that as an academic, as an intellectual, your primary responsibility when you're going to criticize a theory, your primary responsibility before anything else, before offering your own theory or criticizing the other guy's theory or criticizing the other guy's theory and then offering your own theory, before any of that, your primary responsibility is just representing the other guy's theory accurately. This is often called the principle of charity. It's like you can't lie about what someone else is saying in order to criticize what they're saying. That's called the straw man, right? Okay, so what Jonathan Haidt has done to Christopher Mooney here is essentially a very backhanded compliment. Pardon me. Okay, do you see? He's saying, oh, Christopher Mooney, the guy to my left here, he's done. I'm going to give him the stamp of approval. He's done a great job in accurately representing the current state of literature, which is like the most basic baseline thing you're supposed to do. Okay? So he's complimenting Christopher Mooney, but he's saying, hey, dude, you've done your, the basic thing you're supposed to do right. Like, he's not giving any credence or he's not approving of the conclusions that Christopher Mooney has come to. He's saying, you've done the thing that you're supposed to do as far as saying, accurately recounting what other people are saying. So it's a total backhanded compliment. And again, you're going to see the look on Christopher Mooney's face, 2.5 IPAs, grow increasingly uncomfortable because here's just another instance of Jonathan Haidt sort of flexing on this guy, saying, but beyond the most basic thing that you're supposed to do as an academic, bro, you're not really right. And that's what makes everyone else on this panel uncomfortable, is the degree and the sense to which Jonathan Haidt, the guy on the left, is breaking from the pack here. And they are all concerned, and you're going to see them increasingly concerned as he goes on about what his conclusions that he puts forward do to what they're ultimately trying to do. And if you want to understand what they're ultimately trying to do, you need to go back and listen to the prior installments of this series. They're trying to foist socialism on you, okay?
But the one point that I really want to make is that morality binds and blinds. It binds people into teams, and then on those teams, they look for evidence to support what they want. Both sides do it, and the key...
Both sides do it. Look at the reticence on Christopher Mooney's face. Like, here's the first break. Here's where it starts to get a little bit dicey for him and the rest of them. Because if you say that both sides do it, well, now you sort of can't keep pushing this narrative about the right being biased and the left being neutral. And that is the whole purpose of clutching naturalism and pretending like it's neutrality. All right? So what Jonathan Haidt is saying is, actually, this thing that we're accusing all of them of doing, and the reason we're saying we're politically and socially and culturally and morally superior to them, and the reason we should cancel them and not even listen to them, as Christopher Hayes says, I don't even entertain people. I won't even talk to people who deny climate change anymore. What Jonathan Haidt is saying is, the reasons for posturing like that are actually kind of false. We all do it. And that's going to make all these people very uncomfortable with what he has to say. And you can see already the look on Christopher Mooney's face growing increasingly uncomfortable with what Jonathan Haidt is saying. I got to go to the bathroom. All right, I'll back up 10 seconds.
The current state of thinking about politics and personality. But the one point that I really want to make is that morality binds and blinds. It binds people into teams, and then on those teams they look for evidence to support what they want. Both sides do it, and the key...
Both sides do it. Look at the skeptical look on Christopher Mooney's face. As soon as Jonathan Haidt says both sides do it, he's like, uh-oh. Uh-oh. Alert, alert. How far is he going to go with this? Because this is a red flag.
Key thing that I want to introduce here is we all do it around our sacred values. So if we go back 20 years.
We all do it around our sacred values. What's a sacred value? Folks, my 3 to 5 loyal listeners, what's another word for sacred? Religious. All right. In other words, just what I've been saying, we all come to the evidence with a predisposition, an outlook that determines what we will see as a fact and what we won't, and what we will count as evidence and what we won't. We all come to the evidence with colored lenses on our eyes, okay? And Jonathan Haidt is saying that. And up to this point in the history of all these discussions prior to Jonathan Haidt, there hasn't really been anyone on the left admitting that. And you can understand why, because admitting that, someone on the left admitting that, would be to give up the whole game that the left is trying to play on you. They are trying to pretend like they are the neutral, empirical, open, scientific folks. That's what Christopher Mooney's trying to do. That's why he said a little bit ago, Christopher Mooney said his book is all about how the right is less aligned with science and the left is more aligned with science because of their open attitude towards things. But of course, we just brought out a little bit ago that the left's open attitude towards things actually stems from the fact that they are naturalists. And if you're a naturalist, you can't believe that morality is a real thing at all. And of course, you're going to have to be open towards the whole moral long slide down, because you don't have a principled way to stop that slide. You don't believe that morality or any more particular moral principle is a true thing about the universe. So if enough people push against it, you have to acquiesce. And let the transvestites read the toddlers.
I would have an easier time finding denial of science on the left than on the right. But you can't see it if you're on the left. But in my own field, in psychology...
I'm sorry. I'm such a nerd. Just look at Christopher Mooney as Jonathan Haidt is saying this. It's like, it's just so remarkable to watch the nervous look on his face, like, hey bro, please don't go too far with this. You've already gone too far with this, but please, can we please find a foothold to keep doing what we've been doing to the conservatives, to the Christians for the past 50 years, Please stop, bro.
Right, but you can't see it if you're on the left. But in my own field, in psychology,
look at the little teeth bite here. I'm sorry, I'll stop.
Denial of science on the left than on the right. But you can't see it if you're on the left. But in my own field, in psychology, because the left really sacralizes all these issues about race differences, gender differences, those are so scary that on the left, there's 30 or 40 years of more than ambivalence, denial of heritability, IQ, innate sex differences.
So what Larry Summers ran up against in his comments about women.
See Christopher Mooney? He's like, should I chime in here? Because this is the point. I got to stop this guy. Christopher Mooney cannot deal with Jonathan Haidt at an intellectual level, but he knows where what Jonathan Haidt is saying leads. And so, look at this. Look at this. He's like, I got to put a stop to this. And in a moment, he's going to try to rely on Christopher Hayes, this guy over here, this guy, to put a stop to it. They're all going to be like, somebody put a stop to this. All right? All right, this is so fascinating.
And science.
That's right. I would really urge people, if you just Google Larry
Oh,
Summers.
look, he's like, do I interject here? Look, watch him. He's like, oh, God, help me. Help me get through this episode, Lord God. Oh, God. Okay, I'm just going back
More
up.
than ambivalence, denial of heritability, IQ, innate sex differences.
So what Larry Summers ran up against.
Exactly.
Jonathan Haidt is saying on the left, there's so much religious philosophy, and look at this look on Chris Moody's face. He's saying the left is so scared of there being anything true about this certain set of beliefs that they treat them religiously. You can't deny them. So when a scientist on the left finds evidence that these things aren't true, innate differences between the sexes, innate differences about IQ among races, anything innate. See? Hey, listen, my listeners. Innate. Where does the word innate come from? What's something that's innate? It's natural. They're naturalists. You see? So if there's real differences that are innate, that are natural, then their view that naturalism and all these things that are sort of psychological and social and cultural are sort of like effulgences on the top of the wave, the sort of foam on the wave, that they sort of arise out of, we sort of construct them. They're not real at the core of reality. The idea that there's any real differences between men and women, between, right, all these things, the left can't handle those. So they treat those religiously, like Christopher Hayes treats climate change religiously. All right? Now look at Christopher Mooney. He's like, I got to put a stop to this because this guy to my right, even though he's my intellectual superior, has just essentially said we're doing what we accuse the right of doing. So this is where it really gets interesting.
In his comments about women and science.
That's right.
Christopher Mooney just made that face like when you want to object, but you're like, I haven't found my place yet, so you kind of purse your lips and stop. Watch.
Years of more than ambivalence, denial of heritability, IQ, innate sex differences.
So what Larry Summers ran up against.
Exactly.
In his comments
That's
about
right.
women and science.
That's right. I would urge people, if you just Google Larry Summers, women in science, if people would read the transcript, it is as nuanced and careful as a person can be, especially when talking about a field that's not their own. And it's bizarre that the left reacted so strongly to it, but it's the same sort of.
It's not bizarre.
Now here comes the cavalry. Here comes the cavalry. He's saying it's bizarre that people respond to this scientist on the left who discovered these things and wants to voice them, that everybody objected to. If you know the history of Larry Summers, then you know about this, right? He's saying it's bizarre that everybody responded to him, and Christopher Mooney right here is being like, no, it's not bizarre. We got to save this. And Christopher Hayes is going to chime in and be like, no, and it's not bizarre. And we'll watch. Just watch. This discussion is getting out of hand so fast, and it's got to be wrangled in. And Christopher Hayes is going to try to wrangle it in.
It's not bizarre, actually. I want to explain why it's not bizarre right after we take a very quick break.
Okay.
Everybody, pause, regroup. We gotta reform the line.
Do you know you have more nerve endings in your gut than you have in your head? You can look it up. Now I know some of you are going to say I did look it up, and that's not true. That's because you looked it up in a book. Next time, look it up in your gut.
Stephen.
It's very important to understand how the left uses non-intellectual cultural forces to push you into certain essentially intellectual positions. And Christopher Hayes has done this twice by a mocking use of a clip of Glenn Beck, and now he's using Stephen Colbert, who is just, in the nature of the case, a mocking pretender of a person on the right, mocking the views of the right. Christopher Hayes is doing that here, okay? But now Christopher Hayes is going to try to rescue this conversation from the implications of the conclusion that Jonathan Haidt has just put forward, because the conclusion that Jonathan Haidt has just put forward, based on the research, right, is that the left sees things through a lens that is sacred and religious and philosophical and thus not empirical, thus not scientific. They do the same thing that we've all been accusing, we being the leftists, we've all been accusing the right of doing and saying that's why we are neutral and better than them, and that's why that's why they're pseudoscientific and we're scientific, and that's why we should predominate. That's why we don't need to listen to them. Christopher Hayes has got to rescue this discussion. Everyone on this panel, except for Jonathan Haidt, has got to find a way to rescue this discussion from what Jonathan Haidt is doing here.
Colbert giving us a brief gloss of a central thesis here. Let's talk about this point of contention, because Jonathan, you're saying, look, we all sort of morally reason in the same way, or we all end up in teams and then we reverse engineer reasons to believe in what our team predisposes us to believe, what they believe, and that cuts across left and right. And you're saying, no, actually, there's something distinct right now in the nature of the both personality and institutional makeup of the American right that makes it distinctly and extremely hostile to science. So,
right.
Defend.
Right. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, other Chris. Right? So Christopher Mooney's like, help me out, dude. Christopher Hayes is like, I'll help you out, dude. What Christopher Hayes is saying here is, okay, we just saw Jonathan Haidt essentially expose us and say that the left does exactly what they accuse the right of doing. And Christopher Hayes is now looking at Christopher Mooney, who's been looking for an in all throughout this time. You saw him. I've paused it probably more than I should. You see the looks on his face, looking for an in, looking to stop Jonathan Haidt. And Christopher Hayes has now provided him that in. And he's saying, okay, Christopher Mooney, now explain to us why there's something distinct about the way the right does it that makes it problematic in the way that it's not problematic in the way that Jonathan Haidt has showed that the left does it too. In other words, now that Jonathan Haidt has shown that we all look at the facts through tinted glasses and we color the facts through the tint of our glasses, explain to us, Christopher Mooney, why the tint on our glasses is better than the tint on the glasses of the conservatives.
I agree with him that everybody reasons based on emotion. And I agree that there's experiments when you can get the left to be more biased than the right if you push certain emotional buttons. So I agree with that. Nevertheless, I think there's something about the liberal psychology in its affiliation with the scientific community and its willingness to change its views over time, such that you might have some liberal biases, but over time they're going to more find the truth. And I think evolution is a great example. So,
see, all Christopher Mooney is doing here now to shore up the liberal point is he's trying to say, but look, we are more like scientists because we change our beliefs over time. But all he really means, listen, please hear me. We're an hour and 42 minutes into this. All he really means is we don't ever bring down a hard moral absolute rule over anyone. And the only reason they don't do that is because they can't, because they're naturalists. So he's saying so he's treating, again, not treating, he's treating, but more, he's conflating, he's confusing, he's treating two things as one thing. He's conflating the liberal tendency to just acquiesce to every moral degradation, the long slide. He's conflating that openness, which is an openness which has to be open because they don't believe morality is real. He's conflating that openness with the openness of science. The openness of science is a real thing that conservatives and liberals believe in. It's just how empirical observation and scientific theory formation works. That's just the scientific method. That's all that is. And he's trying to say, but the liberals are more like scientists because we treat everything as open. But the reason they treat everything as open because they're naturalists and they have to believe that morality isn't real. So they have to be open towards all new moral conclusions because new moral conclusions are just as good as old moral conclusions because morality is a fiction. It's a fiction, as they say in academia. It's a construct. So we might as well construct it a different way if people press hard enough. That's all Christopher Mooney is saying here.
For instance, I'm a liberal. I think you can't understand human beings outside of evolution. All right, so clearly, maybe 3 decades ago, I wouldn't have been comfortable feeling that way, but I missed all that, you know, and I'm...
No. Now I got to step in. Now I got to flex. Listen. Sorry, this is my field. This is what I studied in. There is nothing that has been brought out in the academic literature in the past, what did he say, 3 decades, 4 decades, whatever, since Darwin. There's nothing that has been brought out recently that has reinforced or shored up Darwinism such that you could reasonably disagree with it 3 decades ago, but not now. Christopher Mooney is saying, well, look, I'm a liberal. I'm more open. So I might have been like the conservatives 3 decades ago, but now, for instance, with Darwinism, I see now that it has to be true. Spoiler alert, there's nothing in the academic literature that's come out over the past 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever decades that has reinforced Darwinism in the way that he's acting like Darwinism has been reinforced. Nothing. Okay?
All for it. And the left, I think, is largely changed on that. Well, you have the right. Denial of evolution is over 100 years old. And it's not just denial of little things, all right? These people think that they're...
Yes. Denial of evolution is over 100 years old. It's true. It's true. You know what? Right after Darwin wrote The Origin of Species, one of his main scientific opponents, George Jackson Mivart, wrote immediately and pointed out a gaping flaw, and there have been bigger gaping flaws pointed out since this, okay, which I covered in the last episode. But right at the time, he just said denial of evolution is over 100 years old. Right at the time, one of his scientific colleagues, okay, pointed out a huge flaw in what Darwin was saying with natural selection and the way that it worked in forming new appendages, new species, there's a huge problem that George Jackson Mivart pointed out. And the way that the evolutionary community interacted with Mivart is the same way that the climate change folks interact with the non-climate change folks now. They just looked at his work and said, well, he's not a real scientist then. They didn't actually interact with his arguments. They didn't interact. I hope you're watching this on YouTube, because this is me just looking at you. Okay? They didn't interact with his logic. They didn't interact with his reasons. They didn't interact with his rational arguments. They just said, well, if this guy disagrees with us, then he's not a scientist. Even though the guy was a scientist par excellence, right? So there's nothing that's been brought out in the time period that Christopher Mooney is referencing here that has now shown that Darwin has to be right. So yes, Christopher Mooney's right. Denial of evolution is over 100 years old. Right after Darwin wrote, the gaping flaws in what Darwin was saying, in as far as what was known at the time, were exposed. And they're still exposed. Okay? There's nothing new under the sun. Okay? So, but Christopher Mooney is trying to use this as an example of the same kind of scientific openness that the liberals supposedly have, that amend their beliefs over time and update their beliefs over time according to the evidence. There's no evidence that's come out. In fact, it's gotten worse for the Darwinians. It's gotten worse over the past 100 years. And he's trying to pretend, because he grew up in the modern academic intellectual system, American academia, Western academia, right? He grew up in that. He's a child of that. He matriculated in that because he imbibed the story. He believes that this is an example of the way liberal beliefs align with science and the openness of science and the updating of, and the narrowing of beliefs towards the truth that science attempts. He's lying, or he's an idiot. Either one.
The Earth is less than 10,000 years old, and they deny. They deny everything.
Let me back up 10 seconds.
For example, so for instance, I'm a liberal. I think you can't understand human beings outside of evolution. All right, so clearly, maybe 3 decades ago, I wouldn't have been comfortable feeling that way, but I
No, there's nothing 3 decades ago that came out that should make you now comfortable believing that. Nothing. Same problems exist.
missed all that, and I'm all for it. And the left, I think, is largely changed on that. Well, you have the right. Denial of evolution is over 100 years old, and it's not just denial of little things. All right, these people think that the Earth is less than 10,000 years old, and they deny.
I mean, to be fair, some believe 10,000, some believe 10 to 20,000. Okay, and they have very good reasons for thinking so.
Yeah, I mean, they deny everything, right?
But there's also a change over time, right? So that's the difficult causal story that you have to tell, right? Which is that we see certain beliefs get worse over time, or certain anti-science postures get worse over time. Certain kinds of ideological extremism grow more intense. What is the
See, he calls the opponent's position ideological extremism because he cannot see his own view as ideological, even though it's utterly ideological.
source of that? Because things don't remain static, right?
Right. So I want to fully agree with Chris that the
Here comes Jonathan Haidt again. He's like, okay, now look at Christopher Mooney. He's like, I tried, bro. I tried to do my work. And now here comes Jonathan Haidt again saying, nah, actually there's a difference here that we're not countenancing. So Christopher Mooney right there. Look at the nervous look on his face. Look at the fingers clenched. Look at the pseudo-intellectual posture. He's like, okay, what's this guy going to say? And how do I argue? How do I say more than what I just said to argue against it? Now just watch. Just watch.
Psychology does predispose liberals more to be receptive to science.
Oh, God, it's so good. I wish this episode could be like 5 hours long. We could just frame by frame watch Christopher Mooney as Jonathan Haidt talks. Let me back it up 10 seconds.
So I want to fully agree with Chris that the psychology does predispose liberals more to be receptive to science. My own research has found that conservatives are better at group binding, at loyalty, and so if you put them in a group versus group conflict, yes, the right is more prone psychologically to band around and be, sort of circle the wagons.
Why do you suppose that is? I hope it's clear now. It's because we know that morality is real. We know that it is as wrong to murder. We know that it is as true that it's wrong to murder as it is true that the objects fall from the sky at 9.8 meters per second. In other words, morality is a part of reality in the same way that gravity is a part of reality. These people believe that morality is made up. Do you see what that must do to their political and social beliefs? It should be clear by now. They could never hold fast to anything, and thus the long slide.
I just want to read one quote because I think both of us are on the same page here that the psychology doesn't tell you exactly what's going to happen. The psychology is just the starting point, and you need to look at history. So there was recently a study by Gordon Goshaw, a sociologist, finding that basically testing Chris's claim, and it found that, yes, Chris was right, that the change over the last 40, 50 years is that the right has gone less and less, they've gotten less and less trusting of scientists. So that was really good for Chris's idea, and that's true. But I just want to, here's one little nuance on that. An interview with Goshaw, he said,
Here he goes again.
public opinion on science in Europe and Japan skews differently than in the United States. There, skepticism about the scientific community usually comes from the left. The reason may be that the issues on the scientific forefront in Europe, such as genetically modified food and nuclear power, tend to push liberals' buttons.
That's interesting.
But again, I think that you can kind of easily wade into a kind of morass of cultural relativism where everybody's equally irrational. And the fact is...
Now here is the next level in the fun body language thing we're doing here. Because now this is the first time that this liberal chick from the New York Times or Slate or whatever she's from, both I think, has chimed in. And listen to her. She's like, well, we don't want to wade into cultural relativism. Folks, my 3 to 5 loyal listeners, what is cultural relativism? Better yet, where does cultural relativism come from? Cultural relativism is the belief that any culture's moral values and mores and principles are as good or bad as any other. Where would that come from? It comes from the belief that moral principles, that morality is a construct. If morality is a construct, then cultural relativism has to be true. If naturalism is true, then morality has to be a cultural construct. If morality is a cultural construct, then moral relativism has to be true. If moral relativism is true, then cultural relativism has to be true. And here's this chick now chiming in for the first time, like, whoa, 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 we don't want to slide into cultural relativism. Bro.
I mean, although obviously you're right, and that was true, I think, in the U.S. in the 70s, where you had a big kind of back to nature, anti-empirical strain on the left and the feminist community.
Right. Look at this guy. Look at Jonathan McWhorter. This chick is fun to listen to because she's just like, she's just a chicken head. I don't mean that in the sexual sense, sorry. She's just a chicken head. She's just a parrot. She's just like quickly like digging for anything she was told to say as an undergraduate and trying to recount it. Okay? And this guy's kind of like, I've got something to say, and I don't know where to say it. Just watch this. Watch this guy as all this goes on, but listen to her as well. She is clueless.
In all kinds of communities. Right. However, I think there's a big difference between being skeptical of nuclear power or skeptical of genetically modified foods, although maybe that is slightly less rational than skepticism about nuclear power. That's really different than denying an empirical fact like evolution or...
Okay, we've talked about logical fallacies. Now this is, again, what did I say is so interesting about this clip? They're all on the same team. But they're all operating at different levels and different degrees of intellectual awareness and honesty. Okay? So now we have the third level. We have Jonathan Haidt, we have Christopher Mooney, and now we have this chick who's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Even though Jonathan Haidt has said we're all doing this, there's got to be some difference in the way that we're doing it than the way that they're doing it. Okay? Now this, in logic, in philosophy, in argumentation, is called, it's a fallacy, it's called special pleading. Special pleading is where you have two things that are the same, clearly the same, some sameness has been brought out between them, and you're like, so you can't draw a principled distinction between them, and you're looking at, but you like one and you don't like the other, so you're like, I know we're saying this, they're the same, and we can't draw a principled distinction between them, but let's like this one and not like that one. Let's prefer this one and not that one. Let's extol this one and denigrate that one. She is special pleading. Watch. I'm just going to back it up a step. You'll totally see this.
A big difference between being skeptical of nuclear power or skeptical of genetically modified foods, although maybe that is slightly less rational than...
And what's so interesting is the guys on the panel see that she's doing this and see that she's making this mistake. But because she's on the same team as them, especially the same team as Christopher Mooney, they have to be careful about how they point out where she's going wrong. It's like they, in the same way that Jonathan Haidt is Christopher Mooney's intellectual superior, they are her intellectual superior, and she is operating like a first-year undergraduate student, Philosophy 101, and she's like, oh, but this is not really the same thing, even though they've just been shown to be principally the same thing. The left argues in terms of their fundamental sacred religious commitments, and so does the right. And Jonathan Haidt has pointed that out. Christopher Mooney has tried to draw some principled distinction between them, and Jonathan Haidt's like, no, you didn't really do it, bro. And now this chick chimes in, and she's like, we don't want to fall into cultural relativism. And I think that our doing it is not really the same as they're doing it. And even Christopher Mooney, watch the little hand gesture here. Even Christopher Mooney's like, oh, hon, that's not going to do. You can't really do that, hon. Watch.
A big difference between being skeptical of nuclear power or skeptical of genetically modified foods, although maybe that is slightly...
He caught it right there. Look at him. Okay, first of all, look at Jonathan Haidt like, oh, you're out of your league, hon. You're out of your league. And Christopher Mooney's like, if I don't point out that you're out of your league, this guy's going to point out that you're out of your league. Somebody ought to point out that you're out of your league. But she goes on.
Less rational than skepticism about nuclear power. That's really different than denying an empirical fact like evolution or like the Earth being longer than 10,000. I think that there is.
Look at that. Oh shit! I just tore the cord out of my mic. Look at now. Jonathan Haidt is like shaking his head and closing his eyes, and Christopher Mooney's like, I gotta explain to this girl where she's going wrong. This is so, oh God, this is so good. Watch. Just watch these two guys respond to her nonsense.
different than denying an empirical fact like evolution or like the Earth being longer than 10,000. I think that there is, but don't you don't think that
Did you see Jonathan Haidt right there? He's like, no, hon, that's not actually. You're just special pleading. Like,
different than denying an empirical fact like evolution or like the Earth being longer than 10,000. I think that there is, but don't you don't think that there's a difference between, you don't think that there are rational and kind of empirical reasons to be skeptical?
okay, see? She's like, I look at Christopher Hayes in the middle, like, I can even see what she's doing here and it's not gonna work, but who's gonna gently mansplain this to her? That's what's going on. Meanwhile, this guy, we'll get to him in a second. She's like, don't you think that there's rational reasons for the utterly irrational move I'm making here? Somebody help me out, she's saying. And they're gonna be like, hun, you can't really do that.
Or worried about nuclear power. To me, that's just very different than denying.
Notice, as a woman, look at, she's appealing to her emotions and her own mindset. She says, to me, what we're doing is different than what they're doing. But she can't give a principled reason why. And the rest of these guys see that and we're like, how do we break that news to her without breaking ranks?
A clear reality. The kind of utter safety of nuclear power is not a reality.
It's so fun watching these two guys because Jonathan Haidt the whole time is like, no, hon, oh, no. He's just shaking his head, and Christopher Mooney's like, I gotta find a way to break it to her. Just look at these two guys at the same time as they respond to her.
To me, that's just very different than denying a clear reality. The kind of utter safety of nuclear power is not a reality in the way that the age of the
Christopher Mooney did the pursed lips eye roll, look at the ceiling, like, where do I even begin to explain to her where she's going wrong? Watch.
Reality. The kind of utter safety of nuclear power is not a reality in the way.
No one's ever gonna watch this. I don't care. I'm right. This is so great.
That the age of the Earth is a
radiation. You know, it doesn't travel all the way across the Pacific from Fukushima and kill babies on the West Coast. Like, that's really a safe statement.
Jonathan Haidt, the beta male, he's good. He's a good intellectual, but look, come on. Let me just say about this guy right here. About all these guys. Ladies, if there's any ladies listening to this, you're gonna be so upset with me. Ladies, isn't it interesting how the guys on the right, do I say this here? This is maybe a subject for a different podcast at a different time. These guys are so soft. Just tell the woman she's wrong, man. Okay, Christopher Mooney's trying. He's trying.
But a lot of people on the left might actually be inclined
but
to believe that.
But the danger that nuclear reactors lead to a Fukushima is...
Well, that's a different issue.
But there's also...
That's a different issue. See, I'm going to agree with Christopher Mooney. I'm fair-handed. I'm even-minded. Christopher Mooney's right. That's a different issue. This woman is being moved by her emotions, and she's arguing. She's special pleading. She's trying to draw a principled distinction between two things that are utterly the same, as Jonathan Haidt has pointed out, and she's appealing to something in her own mind and a different issue. And Christopher Mooney's like genteelly trying to explain that to her.
Let me just say this. There's also a huge...
Here comes Christopher Hayes to the rescue.
Institutional component to this, right? That to me is key, right? Yeah. You do not have huge Democratic politicians running around. In fact, they're all pro-nuclear power. You know, all the above. We just had
the left changes, right?
We just had a new permit for
the left changes. Christopher Mooney's just on this refrain. He's like, we update our beliefs over time. We're more scientific. Jonathan Haidt's like, oh god, this is just the same thing over and over from this guy, but I've clearly shown that he's not right. So is anybody gonna? He's kind of jaded. Look at the jaded look on his face, and look at the nervous, tense look on Christopher Mooney's face. Like, I gotta bring this home. I gotta cross the finish line. We're right. The conservative, Christian, Republican, red state folks are wrong. Everybody, come on.
For the first nuclear power plant to be built, I think in 15 years, if I'm not mistaken. So there's a kind of malleability there. And I want to talk about how if you guys are right, how do we avoid a bleak landscape of will to power nihilism in which no one can persuade anyone of anything, and I come to work every day hoping to bring some information into the public, and I'm completely banging my head against the wall and my life is meaningless. They will rescue me from that right after this break.
No, I'll rescue you from it right now, Christopher Hayes. I'll rescue you from it right now. Here's the way that we avoid a bleak will-to-power landscape where no one can convince anyone of anything. We simply address the foundational beliefs. Instead of arguing the superficial, we argue the foundational, religious, metaphysical, ontological, philosophical beliefs at the bottom that are governing everything you say, like your tinted glasses, and we just address those beliefs. And I've done those in past installments of this series. So, we've done it already, bro. And we still haven't heard from Jonathan McWhorter. But as you saw in the last few minutes, he's got something he wants to say. So he's going to find a time to chime in here. It's going to be very interesting what he has to say. We're almost done. Like I said, I only want to comment on about 10 of these 20 minutes, so we're almost done here. But we gotta hear this next segment.
Good morning from New York. I'm Chris Hayes here with Columbia linguistics professor John McWhorter, also of the New York Daily News. Michelle
Hasn't said a word yet.
From Newsweek and the Daily Beast. Jonathan Haidt, professor of psychology at the University of Virginia and author of The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided. And Chris Mooney, author of The Republican Brain, The Science of Why They Deny Science and Reality. We're talking about
the science of why they deny science and reality. There's your clue there. They deny reality. The way you conceive of reality is a function of the lens through which you see reality. And the lens through which you see reality is a philosophical, religious, metaphysical lens. So it's no secret why the left and the right see the facts differently. Because they look through different lenses.
the ways in which...
But the left does not acknowledge that they're wearing tinted lenses. All right, their tinted lens is naturalism, and naturalism is not science. Okay, but they pretend like it's science, and then they accuse you of denying science.
Which people do their political and ideological reasoning, I think, is the common topic here. The degree to which there are systematic personality, psychological differences between the way liberals and conservatives think about the world, which there, from the research and the literature, appears to be. In certain personality traits are highly correlative with certain ideological, or yeah, that's a good point. Yes. Moderately correlated with certain ideological.
Jonathan Hayes even had to see. Christopher Hayes is trying to like wrap this up, and he's like, they're the differences are highly correlated, and Jonathan Haidt's like, no, I just established, folks, that we do the same thing, and you can't just assert that we don't. They're moderately correlated because the left and the right has their sacred values, their religious outlook, their lens that they see the facts through, and I've established that he is the outlier here, and they are all trying to rally the troops and circle the wagons and maintain the left's pretense of being scientific. And he is disrupting that, and that is the fundamental tension in this clip.
Dispositions, and then how those agglomerate into groups and institutions that pursue a political agenda. And the key locus, or the key insight from which both books spring, is the fact that we don't reason in the way that we, as in the Enlightenment mode of, I throw out a reason, you throw out a reason, we wrestle with them, I'm persuaded, you're persuaded, then we come to an agreement. No, we have these intuitions. Those intuitions are formed by all sorts of things: personality, relationships, our cultural embeddedness. And then once we use those intuitions to arrive at things that we...
Fundamental metaphysical assumptions like naturalism,
our values, right? We say this is sacred, or this is important, or I like equality. Then we use our reason to come up with reasons to believe the thing that our intuition tells us. If that is the landscape, what does that do? And I'm going to ask a big question that we're probably not going to resolve on cable news. What does that do to the...
No, you're definitely not going to resolve it, because you will never admit your own bias. You will never admit that you are motivated by a religious outlook. Your whole game, your whole con, your whole ruse against good people is to pretend like you are neutral and they are not, and to accuse them of bias and pressure them to see things the way you do. But the way you see things is constantly degrading and eroding via the long slide, because you can take a principled stand against nothing, and you can take a principled stand against nothing because of naturalism, your religious outlook, you believe that morality, and morality underpins politics, right? Politics doesn't make any sense unless you first assume morality. Morality, according to you, is a construct. It's a fiction.
Entire Enlightenment project. Because if the fact of the matter is we're all fooling ourselves about this whole thing, or I'm fooling myself when I come on television and try to persuade people about certain things, then what are we doing? I mean, why does it even matter? Why am I ever giving reasons for anything?
The Enlightenment project was that we could use our minds, we could use the new institution of science from the 17th century, we could use it to answer these difficult questions and to do social policy better. In that sense, I'm an Enlightenmenter. I'm a big fan of the Enlightenment, and I think this new work is part of the Enlightenment project. What it says, paradoxically, is that if you think that reason, individual reason, is the way forward, well, then you're wrong. And so for 300 years, the project has been barking up the wrong tree. Because we are all so crippled by the confirmation bias, because we all as individuals...
Explain what confirmation bias is.
Basically, we use our reason just to confirm what we already believe. Right. If that's true about all of us, then I think we all have to get a little more humble as individuals, recognize that as...
Can't have that. Can't have that. This is what all these folks want to resist about him. He is saying we all do it. We have lenses on our eyes too. And they, again, just go back to the first installments of this series. The whole game that they play against you, the whole way that they are moving you towards socialism is through pretending like the philosophical outlook, the religious outlook that they look at reality through is a neutral outlook that we all share. And insofar as you're not party to it, you are biased and they are not. And that is the game they're playing against you. And he is disrupting that. And they have to stop him. And they have been trying to stop him. And they're failing.
Individuals were not very good at finding the truth. That we only can find the truth when we're put into relationships in which other people can question our confirmation bias. And this is what has changed. Science works because each of us individually flawed scientists challenge each other. And so as Chris says, over time, the scientific community does update, whereas, say, the religious right may not.
Okay. Chris, this one is aimed probably mostly at you, but I'd like to know the take of both of you on this.
Here he comes. Now Jonathan McWhorter is going to speak up. He's been waiting the whole time to say this. And I just want to say before he talks, if you go back an episode or two in this series, I think it was last episode or the episode before that I showed you why naturalism as a view of the origin and nature of the human mind cannot work. And then I showed you a litany, a list of folks on the left, folks on this team, from Darwin on. I even cited Darwin. From Darwin on. Folks on their side who have showed that viewing the human mind as merely being the human brain cannot work. All right? And one of the final folks who I showed you in that litany of philosophers and scientists and theorists was a philosopher from New York University who wrote a book where he exposed this, and I quoted him as showing the exact problem that I was trying to show you has presented itself and represented itself all throughout the history of ideas centering around this discussion. Now, what Jonathan McWhorter is about to do is he's about to cite someone who has interacted with that guy. Okay, when that guy wrote what he wrote, everyone jumped on him. Okay? And Jonathan McWhorter is about to say, I tried to interact with the same stuff and I got jumped on and canceled too. Okay? Let me just, sorry, I'm 4 beers deep here. Let me just remember who that guy was. Sorry, name is escaping me at the moment. But essentially, there is this philosopher from New York University who's a philosopher of mind, philosopher of language, and he gave one of the final recent expressions to the problem that I highlighted when I was talking about the 100-year fail, the 100-year fail in attempting to explain how the human mind could merely be the human brain. Now, one of the other things that guy did was he reviewed a book by one of the Discovery Institute scientists. The Discovery Institute is that like conservative Christian think tank who criticizes evolution. Okay? This guy, this New York University philosopher of language, philosopher of mind, reviewed a book written by one of these Discovery Institute scientists who Joe Rogan has recently had on his show. And he gave it a very positive review, and everyone jumped down his throat for doing so. Okay? And now listen to what Jonathan McWhorter has to say about when he made a similar inquiry.
This idea of there being a conservative personality. A few years ago, I proposed, it was on Blogging Hits. I'm very interested in evolution. I love biology. And I've always wondered whether natural selection explained everything. I do not believe in God. I'm not interested in intelligent design. But I read a book by Michael Behe that was saying...
See, I'm on the same team as all you guys, but I'm trying to be intellectually honest, and I read somebody on I read somebody who suggested, I read somebody on the other side that suggested that natural selection can't explain everything. Now, the person who he read, Michael Behe, is one of the Discovery Institute scientists. But here's the interesting thing. The idea that natural selection cannot explain everything is an idea as old as Darwin's book itself. And there's many, many prominent evolutionists who agree with this. But these folks cannot acknowledge this. They have to pretend like any criticism of Darwinism comes from the right. But it doesn't. This is the game they're running against you. There are folks, there are leading lights, there are prominent intellectuals on their side who are like, bro, this doesn't work. But if you cite them, they circle the wagons and outcast you in the same way that they're trying to circle the wagons and outcast Jonathan Haidt here.
That when it gets to how evolution creates large jumps and steps as opposed to small things, it seems like there must be some other mechanism. We don't know what it is. Michael Behe thought that it was about God. I was thinking, I wonder what this other thing might be. I found it fascinating. I contacted him. We did a Blogging Heads debate. I had several new ones torn out of me by the Blogging Heads community. The liberal scientist.
Look at her. Look at her as he said this. She's like, of course you did. Because you didn't just repeat the stuff I was told to repeat as an undergraduate. She's like, of course, you're an idiot. You're an idiot.
I contacted him. We did a Blogging Heads debate.
Look at her.
I had several new ones torn out of me by the Blogging Heads community. The liberal scientists thought that I was the worst thing people writing. I've never seen someone so high fall so low so quickly. And all of this was the kind of behavior that is associated with conservatives. There was a circling of the wagons, not reason, because I was taught.
Look at her looking at herself in the monitor. She's like, I'm going to respond to this kind of thing, but I just want to see how I look first.
Conservatives, there was a circling of the wagons, not reason, because I was trying to make sense. I wasn't making a godly argument. That happened, it's over. But it leads me to think that this is perhaps human behavior. How do we fit in that even with evolution, the facts are not always as clear completely as we're told, and that if you dare to question this, if you dare to talk about it in public.
Michael Behe as a scientist?
But how reliable is Michael Behe as a scientist? Hun, it's not just Michael Behe. It's folks on the other side. It's Harvard-educated, Harvard-teaching evolutionary evolutionists who are like, no, natural selection doesn't work in this case, it doesn't work in this case, it doesn't work in this case. But these folks don't want to talk about that. They want to attribute all that dissent to folks on the other side so they can quickly write it off in the way that Christopher Hayes writes off any discounting of global warming. Oh, those aren't scientists. It's because they all have colored lenses on their eyes. So this guy's been waiting the whole episode to chime in about this. Okay, I'm sorry I'm having such a tough time recounting names at this point. I've interacted with a lot of these folks over emails. I could show you the emails. When I was writing some of my graduate student work, I talked with a lot of these guys about the stuff that I was writing. Who's the guy that wrote? Who's the Discovery Institute guy that wrote The Signature in the Cell? Stephen Meyer. Okay. And a lot of other guys, Michael Behe and one other main prominent guy. There's like a handful of main prominent guys from the Discovery Institute. Okay, Jonathan McWhorter is saying, I just tried to have an open mind and interact with this guy, and I was treated as anathema for doing so. Of course, bro, you were treated as anathema for doing so, even though honest intellectuals on the left say the same things that those guys are saying, because you cannot admit that we do the same thing that they're doing. And that's why all the parties to this discussion are trying to sort of like shore up the ground and reinforce the ground that this guy right here, Jonathan Haidt, is eroding with what he has to say. And this chick is doing the most naive, intellectually unnuanced, just version of that. All right. So, but how reliable is Michael Behe as a scientist? This is the same thing they said about George Jackson Mivart when he pointed out right after Darwin wrote what he pointed out. They're like, well, that's not a scientist. He's not a scientist.
That's intelligent
Herbert McCabe said the same thing about George Jackson Mivart.
design. I mean, the scientific community has extraordinarily strongly rejected that. And if they get a little upset when you bring it up, it's because it's a direct assault.
Look at. She's a woman. Look at herself in the monitor. She's always looking at herself in the monitor.
We're told, and that if you dare to question this, if you dare to say anything about it in public,
the scientific community is really, that's intelligent design. I mean, the scientific community has extraordinarily strongly rejected that. And if they get a little upset when you bring it up, it's because it's a direct assault to their scientific expertise. I'm not sure that that's the same.
But I mean, even if you say, I don't believe that it's intelligent design, it's not about God, but is there something? Is there something else?
But I don't think the scientists agree with him that there are big gaps in the theory of evolution, right?
Well, then you don't know the literature, hun. You just are not apprised to the current state of this debate. Because there are plenty. I mean, I can show you a compilation. Not from conservatives, not from Christians, not from these guys' side of the debate. I can show you a compilation of essays written on this topic. But she doesn't know that because she was raised, she was matriculated, she was born out of the mother's milk of this Western intellectual Western intellectual inculcation that just gets you to repeat this nonsense so you can believe and you can attribute to the opponent all the bias that they want to attribute to you. She is the archetypical example of the ignorant pseudo-intellectual. Okay, all these guys are. Even Jonathan Haidt to some extent. She's like the third degree here. He's the first degree. He's the second degree. He's the fourth degree. She's the final. She's the linchpin. All right. She just doesn't know. She just doesn't know the literature. She doesn't know it.
It essentially is putting God in the process or implying that God's in the process. So if you bring Michael Behe on, and the evolutionary scientists are going to be extremely upset. And that's
right, because the mistake you made was to talk to the devil. So a principle in my book is follow the sacredness, and around it you'll find a ring of motivated ignorance. And evolution is a really contested issue. It's, you know.
Okay, we're almost done. Look, we're almost done. I got to stop this. But look, once again, Jonathan Haidt has brought the whole discussion back to the fact of all these disputes center around what we hold as sacred. And we do not argue for what we hold as sacred. We hold it sacredly with a white knuckle clutch in our pocket. We hold the lenses close to our eyes and pretend like there are no lenses on our eyes, right? And as soon as he chimes in again to say, look, this is what I've been saying all along. Watch Christopher Mooney here. He's like, I thought we were over this. I thought I had done my job. Look at, folks, I'm sorry. I'm a poker player. I'm an amateur poker player. I like to play poker. When you're sitting at a poker table, you have to watch people. Poker's a mental game. It's a psychological game. It's a people game more than it is a numbers game. And you have to watch the things that people do. And one of the things that people do at a poker table is pretend to look casual when they are feeling anything but casual. Okay, so what's one of the ways of discerning whether someone telling the truth about the hand that they have, the strength of the hand that they have? And one of the telltale signs of a poker player who's lying is that they take a fake drink of the drink that is sitting in front of them. Sorry, is this too much? We're almost done. Just watch Christopher Mooney as Jonathan Haidt once again brings the discussion back to his central point, which none of these folks have defeated. Watch Christopher Mooney take a fake drink of this mug in front of him. Look, I just want you to watch this, and I'm going to be done. I promise. Just watch. Ask yourself, What happens when you bring a mug up to your lips and you take a drink? You have to swallow, right? There's liquid passing from the cup to your lips. Christopher Mooney is so uncomfortable because he knows that everything he's been trying to do to disarm and diffuse what Jonathan Haidt is saying has failed. And this chick and this guy, Jonathan McWhorter, has done nothing to help him. And he's supposed to... Watch. Let me just back it up. Just watch. All right, ready?
To talk to the devil. So a principle in my book is follow the sacredness, and around it you'll find a ring of motivated ignorance. And evolution's a really contested issue. It's plays front and center.
God, sorry. I was about to ask you, am I reading too much into this? I'm not going to ask you that. I am not reading too much into this. I am showing you the truth. Look, is he just swallowed? Did he drink anything from that cup? Let me back it up again. I've got 1/3 of a beer left, and I'm going to end this so I can enjoy my beer after this ends. We're done. Just watch.
Follow the sacredness, and around it you'll find a ring of motivated ignorance.
Watch.
Evolution's a really contested issue. It's
plays
front and center. And there are some quacks out there who claim to be scientists. Behe is not a respected scientist.
No.
So you basically commit treason by even just talking to him. You have to know where the fault lines are, where the third rails are, and you touched one.
Wait a second, but I want to ask you a question. No, let's play this.
Christopher Hayes is so annoying. Okay, look, that was not a real sip. Nothing has been said in this clip to disprove what Jonathan Haidt is saying, and what Jonathan Haidt is saying exposes what the left does. They have a religious, philosophical, metaphysical outlook that they see everything through, and if you listen to past installments of the series, you understand that now. It's naturalism, and it's the basis of neuropolitics, and neuropolitics is how they're trying to avoid dealing with all your reasons for believing what you believe, and they're just trying to say you are not as evolutionary evolved as they are, right? And Christopher Mooney knows that he has not made his point, and he's nervous that the segment is ending, and Jonathan Haidt is still holding forth, and he takes a fake drink of this mug one more time.
You have to know where the fault lines are, where the third rails are, and you touched one.
Wait a second, but I want.
So
one more time.
principle in my book is follow the sacredness, and around it you'll find a ring of motivated ignorance. And evolution's a really contested issue. It's plays front and center.
That was not a drink. No liquid passed from that cup to his lips. One more time. Check it out.
To talk to the devil. So a principle in my book is follow the sacredness, and around it you'll find a ring of motivated ignorance. And evolution's a really contested issue. It's plays front and center in Chris's book. And there.
No swallow, no gathering of the liquid. He shouldn't be taking a drink of water. He should be taking a swig of the hemlock, and then he would be able to see. Ladies and gentlemen. Is this the wrong place to end this? I don't care. This is the 40-ounce hemlock. This is episode 57. I've done what I came to do. I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.